Jake Morrison sat in the back corner of the huge conference room, trying to make himself invisible. The chair felt uncomfortable under his military uniform, and he kept checking his watch. He did not want to be here at the Galactic Military Strategy Conference on Station Alpha 7, but his commanding officer had insisted. "You need to get back out there, Morrison," Admiral Hayes had said. 5 years is long enough. 5 years since Kepler 442b. 5 years since everything ended. The conference room buzzed with activity as representatives from dozens of alien species took their seats. Jake watched the tall, elegant Zentari delegates with their crystal-like skin that caught the light. Their movements were graceful and precise, like dancers. Near the front, a group of insectoid vrak clicked and chittered to each other in their strange language. Their compound eyes reflected the room's lights in rainbow patterns. Jake had worked with both species during his 20-year career in the Human Colonial Defense Force. The Zentari were reliable allies, though they sometimes seemed cold and calculating. The Vrak were newer to galactic politics, but had proven themselves trustworthy in recent conflicts. Both species respected human military tactics, even if they did not always understand them. Other aliens filled the remaining seats. There were the blue-skinned Karathi with their extra arms, the floating gas beings called Eth who communicated through color changes, and several species Jake did not recognize. The diversity should have been fascinating, but Jake felt detached from it all. Everything felt distant these days. A young human woman walked onto the stage, carrying a tablet and looking nervous. She was probably in her early 30s, with short brown hair and intelligent eyes behind simple glasses. She wore a civilian academic outfit, a simple blue blazer and black pants. Jake noticed she kept adjusting her glasses as she set up her presentation equipment. "Good morning, everyone," she said into the microphone. Her voice was clear but carried a slight tremor of nerves. "My name is Dr. Lisa Park from the Human Military Strategy Institute. Today I want to talk about asymmetric warfare in multi-species conflicts." Jake settled back in his chair, preparing to endure another boring academic lecture. He had heard dozens of these presentations over the years, professors and researchers who had never seen real combat, talking about war like it was a chess game. They used clean words like acceptable losses and tactical necessity without understanding what those phrases really meant. Dr. Park clicked her first slide into view on the large screen behind her. "I want to examine 3 case studies that demonstrate how smaller forces can defeat larger ones through innovative tactics and strategic thinking." The slide showed a list of battles. Jake's eyes skimmed over them without interest until he saw the 3rd entry. His blood turned to ice water. The Defense of Kepler 442b, a study in tactical sacrifice. Jake's hands gripped the arms of his chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The room suddenly felt too warm, too small. His heart began beating faster, and he could hear it, pounding in his ears. The sounds of the conference room, the alien conversations, the rustling of papers, the hum of the air circulation system, all seemed to fade away. Kepler 442b. His world. His colony. His family. Dr. Park was still talking, but Jake could barely process her words. This battle represents one of the most effective uses of defensive tactics in recent military history. The human defenders, facing overwhelming odds, managed to save thousands of lives through careful planning and willing sacrifice. Jake wanted to leave. Every instinct told him to get up and walk out before this got worse. But his legs would not move. He felt frozen in place, trapped by memories he had spent 5 years trying to bury. The colony on Kepler 442b was home to approximately 50,000 human settlers, Dr. Park continued. It was primarily an agricultural world with extensive farming operations and research facilities. The colonists had been there for 12 years when the hegemony attacked. She clicked to the next slide, which showed an aerial view of the colony. Jake recognized every building, every street, every field. There was the central plaza where Emma had played with her friends. There was the Agricultural Research Center where his wife Rachel had worked on developing new crop strains. There was their house, with the little garden Rachel had been so proud of. The hegemony invasion force consisted of approximately 200 ships and 50,000 ground troops. The human defenders had only 12 ships and 8,000 military personnel, plus whatever civilian volunteers they could organize. Jake remembered that day with crystal clarity. The alarms going off at dawn, the panicked faces of colonists as they realized what was happening, the desperate calls for reinforcements that would never come, the terrible calculations he had to make as commanding officer. Who could be saved and who could not? The human commander made a series of brilliant tactical decisions, Dr. Park said with obvious admiration in her voice. Instead of trying to hold fixed positions, he used hit-and-run tactics to slow the hegemony advance. He also made the difficult choice to evacuate civilians first, even though it meant sacrificing military positions. Brilliant tactical decisions. Jake almost laughed bitterly. There had been nothing brilliant about it. Every choice had been horrible. Every option had meant watching people die. He had sent his own soldiers into situations he knew they would not survive, just to buy a few more minutes for the evacuation. Ships. The most remarkable aspect of this battle was the final defensive action, Dr. Park continued. With evacuation ships carrying 12,000 civilians about to launch, the hegemony made a final push to destroy them. The remaining human defenders, numbering fewer than 2,000, held the spaceport for 6 crucial hours against overwhelming odds. Jake closed his eyes, but that only made the memories more vivid. The sound of explosions getting closer. The smoke and fire. The radio messages from positions being overrun one by one. The faces of young soldiers who trusted him to bring them home, even as he sent them to their deaths. The sacrifice of those final defenders allowed the evacuation to succeed. 12,000 civilians escaped to safety. It remains one of the most studied examples of effective military leadership under impossible circumstances. When Jake opened his eyes, Dr. Park was looking directly at the section where he sat. For a moment, their eyes met across the crowded room. She smiled slightly, probably thinking he was just another interested military officer. She had no idea she was talking to the man who had made those brilliant decisions. She had no idea she was describing the worst day of his life as if it were something to admire. The presentation continued, but Jake heard none of it. He sat motionless, remembering faces and names that would never leave his mind. 38,000 people had died on Kepler 442b, including his wife Rachel and his 8-year-old daughter Emma. Dr. Park called it a tactical success. Jake called it the day his world ended. Dr. Lisa Park clicked to her next slide, completely unaware of the storm she had unleashed in the back of the room. Jake Morrison sat frozen, watching her dissect the battle that had destroyed his life with clinical precision. The human defensive. Strategy showed remarkable innovation, Lisa continued, her voice growing more confident as she warmed to her subject. Rather than attempting a conventional defense that would have failed within hours, the commanding officer implemented what I call calculated sacrifice protocols. Jake's jaw clenched. Calculated sacrifice protocols. She made it sound like a textbook maneuver instead of the desperate improvisation it had been. He remembered standing in the command bunker, looking at the tactical display showing red enemy markers advancing from every direction. There had been no grand strategy, just a series of impossible choices made in the space of heartbeats. "Let me show you the tactical map from the first day of the invasion," Lisa said, bringing up a detailed diagram of the colony. Red arrows showed hegemony advance routes, while blue dots marked human defensive positions. The commander could have concentrated his forces here at the main settlement for a traditional defensive stand. Instead, he spread them across 15 different positions. The slide changed to show movement patterns. Each position was designed not to win, but to delay. Small teams of defenders would engage the enemy, inflict casualties, then retreat to the next prepared position. This forced the hegemony to advance slowly and methodically instead of making a quick victory. Jake stared at the screen, seeing his own handwriting on those original tactical plans. He had drawn those positions on paper in his kitchen while Rachel made coffee and Emma practiced her violin in the next room. It had been their last normal morning together, though none of them had known it. The brilliance of this strategy becomes clear when we examine the timeline, Lisa continued. The commander needed 72 hours to evacuate the civilian population. By using these delaying tactics, he stretched what should have been a 6-hour battle into a 3-day campaign. 72 hours. Jake remembered every minute of those 3 days. The exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness, the constant radio chatter of units calling for support he could not provide, the terrible silence when units stopped reporting altogether. Each defensive position was carefully chosen for maximum psychological impact on the enemy, Lisa explained, zooming in on specific locations. The commander understood that the hegemony expected humans to fight conventionally. Instead, he gave them something they had never encountered before, an enemy willing to die slowly and expensively. Jake wanted to laugh at the irony. She was praising him for understanding alien psychology, but the truth was simpler and more human. He had not been thinking about the hegemony's expectations. He had been thinking about buying time for the school buses to reach the spaceport, about giving the medical center staff enough time to evacuate the children's hospital, about keeping the enemy busy while his wife helped coordinate the agricultural evacuation. The second phase of the battle shows even more sophisticated thinking, Lisa continued. As civilian evacuation neared completion, the commander began consolidating his remaining forces around the spaceport. But rather than creating a traditional defensive perimeter, he established what I call sacrifice rings. The tactical display changed to show concentric circles around the spaceport. Each ring was marked with timestamps and casualty estimates. Jake felt sick looking at it. Those weren't tactical positions to Lisa. They were the places where his friends had died. The outer ring consisted of volunteer militia and reserve troops, Lisa explained. Their job was not to stop the enemy, but to make them pay for every meter of ground. When the outer ring was overrun, survivors fell back to the second ring, which consisted of regular army units with better equipment and training. Jake remembered promoting Sergeant Kelly Davis to lieutenant just hours before sending her to command, the outer ring. She had been 23 years old, fresh out of training, scared but determined. She had died holding position 17 with her entire squad, buying an extra hour for the evacuation. The inner ring was the most elite unit, the commander's personal guard and special forces troops, Lisa continued. They held the spaceport itself while the final evacuation ships launched. Of the approximately 400 soldiers in the inner ring, fewer than 30 survived. 30 survivors. Jake had been one of them, pulled unconscious from the wreckage of the command bunker by Marines who should have been saving themselves. He had spent 6 months in a military hospital, recovering from injuries while learning that everyone he loved was dead. The final phase of the battle demonstrates the ultimate expression of human tactical thinking, Lisa said, her voice filled with academic excitement. With the last evacuation ship preparing to launch, the hegemony committed their reserve forces for a final assault. The human commander could have retreated to the ship and escaped with the civilians. Jake's hands were shaking now. He pressed them flat against his legs, trying to maintain control. Instead, he chose to stay and fight. The remaining human forces, fewer than 200 soldiers, held their positions for 6 additional hours while the evacuation ship achieved safe jump distance. Every single one of those soldiers knew they would not survive. They chose to die so that 12,000 civilians could live. The conference room was completely silent. Even the alien delegates seemed moved by the story. Several Zentari were making the gesture they used to honor the dead, touching their crystal foreheads with their fingertips. The Vrak had gone completely still, which was their equivalent of respectful attention. This battle represents something unique in galactic military history, Lisa concluded. Most species fight to win. Some fight to survive, but humans are the only species that regularly chooses to fight knowing they will lose, simply to protect others. The psychological impact of this on enemy forces cannot be overstated. Jake thought about his daughter Emma, who had wanted to be a xenobiologist like her mother. She had been fascinated by the different alien species and had collected pictures of their homeworlds. She had been excited about potentially visiting the Zentari crystal cities someday. Instead, she had died in an emergency shelter when hegemony bombers broke through the final defensive line. The commander of this battle, whose name was classified in the official reports, displayed tactical genius that saved thousands of lives, Lisa said as she prepared to conclude her presentation. His willingness to sacrifice everything, including his own life, exemplifies the very best of human military tradition. But Jake had not died. That was the cruel irony that haunted him every day. He had survived while better people died. He had lived while his family perished. The tactical genius Lisa praised had failed to save the people who mattered most. In conclusion, Lisa said, the defense of Kepler 442b should be required study for any military officer, regardless of species. It demonstrates how human tactical thinking, combined with the uniquely human willingness to sacrifice for others, can achieve impossible victories even in defeat. The conference room erupted in applause. Jake sat motionless as hundreds of beings, human and alien alike, celebrated the worst day of his life. They were applauding the decisions that had saved 12,000 strangers at the cost of his entire world. Lisa smiled and nodded, accepting the praise for her analysis. She had no idea that the subject of her academic study was sitting 30 meters away, dying inside as she turned his nightmares into a case study for tactical excellence. As the applause finally died down, Jake made a decision. He was going to talk to Dr. Lisa Park. She needed to know that her brilliant case study had a name, a face, and a heart that was still breaking 5 years later. She needed to know that tactical genius felt like failure when you counted the cost in faces instead of numbers. The networking break began immediately after Lisa's presentation ended. Aliens and humans moved around the conference room, forming small groups to discuss what they had heard. Jake Morrison remained in his seat for several minutes, watching. Dr. Lisa Park, as she was surrounded by enthusiastic colleagues and military officers. A tall Zentari admiral approached Lisa first, his crystal skin shimmering with colors that indicated deep respect. Jake could not hear the conversation from across the room, but he saw Lisa's face light up with pleasure at the compliment. Several VRAC officers joined the group, clicking their approval in their musical language. Jake finally stood up, his legs feeling unsteady. His military training kicked in automatically, shoulders back, head up, controlled breathing. He had been preparing for difficult conversations his entire career. This should be no different, except everything about it felt impossible. He walked slowly through the crowd, dodging conversations in a dozen different languages. The Karathi were discussing supply chain logistics with some human officers. A group of gas-being Eth were creating colorful light patterns that other species seemed to find fascinating. The room buzzed with the energy of successful scientific exchange. Lisa's group had grown larger by the time Jake reached them. She was in the middle of explaining her research methodology to a human general when Jake positioned himself at the edge of the circle. He waited patiently, using the time to study her more closely. She was younger than he had first thought, probably not yet 35. Her enthusiasm for her subject was obvious in every gesture and expression. When she talked about tactical innovations, her eyes sparked with genuine excitement. She spoke with her hands, using precise movements to illustrate military formations and troop movements. "Dr. Park," the human general was saying, "your analysis of the evacuation timing was particularly insightful. Have you considered how those tactics might apply to current theater operations?" "Actually, that's what I'm working on next," Lisa replied. "I think the Kepler 442b model could be adapted for colony defense in general. The key insight is that defending civilians requires fundamentally different thinking than defending territory." Jake felt his chest tighten. She was talking about turning his tragedy into a general military doctrine. The idea should have horrified him, but instead he found himself curious about her reasoning. Maybe there was value in learning from what had happened, even if the learning came at such a terrible price. The crowd around Lisa gradually thinned as people moved on to other conversations. Soon, only a few officers remained, and Jake was able to step closer. "Dr. Park," he said quietly, "I wonder if I could ask you a few questions about your research." Lisa turned toward him with a bright smile. "Of course, I love talking about this stuff. Are you working on similar research?" "You could say that," Jake replied carefully. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, Human Colonial Defense Force. I have some experience with defensive operations." "Excellent." Lisa's enthusiasm was genuine and infectious. "What did you think of the tactical analysis? I spent months going through the battle reports and communication logs. The level of tactical sophistication was really remarkable." Jake felt his throat go dry. She had read his communications logs. She had analyzed his desperate tactical reports as if they were academic documents. "The battle reports," he said slowly, "were they complete?" "Surprisingly, yes. Usually military records from active combat are fragmentary, but someone did an excellent job documenting this battle. The tactical officer kept detailed logs right up until the final hours." Lisa paused, studying Jake's face. "Are you familiar with this engagement specifically?" "You could say that." Jake's voice sounded strange to his own ears. "I'm curious about your assessment of the civilian casualties. 38,000 people died. Does that factor into your analysis of tactical success?" Lisa's smile faded slightly. The question seemed to catch her off guard. Well, yes, the civilian casualties were tragic. But given the circumstances, the fact that 12,000 people survived was actually remarkable. Without the defensive strategy, the entire population would have been lost. 12,000 people, Jake repeated. Do you know their names? Their names? Lisa looked confused. No, I don't have individual identity records. The evacuation manifests were classified. Why do you ask? Jake took a deep breath. This was the moment of no return. Because 38,000 people also had names. They had families, jobs, dreams. They had children who wanted to be xenobiologists and wives who grew beautiful gardens. Something in his tone made Lisa step back slightly. Her academic excitement was replaced by growing concern. Commander Morrison, are you saying you knew people in the colony? I knew all of them, Jake said quietly. It was my colony, my command, my family. The color drained from Lisa's face. Around them, the noise of the conference continued, but their small space felt suddenly isolated and silent. Lisa stared at Jake as if she were seeing him for the first time. She started, then stopped. You're the commanding officer from the battle. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, former commanding officer of the Kepler 442b Colonial Defense Force, Jake confirmed. The man who made all those brilliant tactical decisions you've been praising. Lisa's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, I had no idea. The report said the commanding officer was listed as missing, presumed dead. I was missing for a while, unconscious in a medical facility while they tried to put me back together. By the time I was coherent enough to file reports, the battle analysis was already classified as a tactical study. Jake's voice remained calm, but Lisa could see the pain in his eyes. I've never seen my own decisions analyzed so thoroughly before. Commander, I am so sorry, Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper. I never meant to. I had no idea. You were alive, let alone here. Don't apologize for your research, Jake said. Your analysis was accurate. The tactics were sound. The sacrifice was necessary. 12,000 people lived because 38,000 died. The math is simple. But it's not just math, is it? Lisa's academic training was warring with her human empathy. Those weren't just tactical units. They were people? Yes, they were people. Jake's control was starting to crack. Sergeant Davis, who died holding the outer perimeter. She was 23 and wanted to be a teacher after her service ended. Captain Williams, who held position 12 for 6 hours with a broken leg. He had twin daughters back on Earth. Lisa listened in growing horror as Jake continued. My wife Rachel was coordinating agricultural evacuation. She made sure the seed banks and genetic samples got on the ships instead of getting on herself. My daughter Emma was 8 years old. She wanted to study alien plants like her mother. She died in Shelter 7 when the hegemony broke through the inner ring. Tears were running down Lisa's face now. Commander, I don't know what to say. Say that you understand the real cost of those brilliant tactics, Jake said. Say that you'll remember their names, not just the tactical innovations. Say that when you teach this battle to future officers, you'll help them understand that every tactical decision has a human price. Lisa nodded, unable to speak. I spent 5 years trying to forget that battle, Jake continued, trying to convince myself that I did the right thing. Listening to your presentation, hearing you call it a tactical masterpiece, it helped me realize something. What? Lisa managed to ask. That maybe the point isn't to forget. Maybe the point is to remember them all, the ones who lived and the ones who died. Maybe the point is to make sure their sacrifice means something more than just a case study. Lisa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. What can I do? How can I make this right? Jake was quiet for a long moment, watching the alien delegates moving around the conference room. These beings represented dozens of species, hundreds of worlds. Some of them might face the same choices he had faced someday. Help me make sure they understand, he said finally. Help me teach them that tactical brilliance isn't about the decisions themselves. It's about carrying the weight of those decisions afterward. It's about making sure the sacrifice was worth it. Lisa nodded slowly. Will you help me rewrite the analysis? Will you help me tell the real story? Jake looked at her for a long moment. For the first time in 5 years, he felt something other than grief and guilt. He felt purpose. Yes, he said. Let's tell them about Emma and Rachel and Sergeant Davis. Let's make sure the galaxy remembers that tactics have faces. Lisa Park led Jake Morrison to an empty conference room down the hall from the main auditorium. Her hands were still shaking as she closed the door behind them. The room was small and sterile, with a simple table and chairs designed for quick meetings between sessions. Through the single window, they could see the stars beyond Station Alpha 7. I want to withdraw the paper, Lisa said immediately as they sat down. I can't present research that causes you this kind of pain. Jake shook his head. Don't do that. The galaxy needs to learn from what happened on Kepler 442b, just not the way you've been teaching it. Then help me understand, Lisa said, pulling out her tablet and setting it on the table between them. Help me see what I missed. Jake stared at the device for a moment. Lisa's presentation was still loaded on the screen, showing the tactical map of his former home. What you missed is that tactics are made by people, not computers. Every decision point on your map represents a moment when someone had to choose between bad options and worse ones. Tell me about those moments, Lisa said softly. Jake was quiet for a long time, organizing thoughts he had spent 5 years trying to avoid. The first decision came 6 hours before the attack. Our deep space sensors detected the hegemony fleet dropping out of hyperspace at the system's edge. I had maybe 10 minutes to decide whether to try fighting them in space or falling back. To defend the planet. Your report said you chose planetary defense because the space battle was unwinnable, Lisa said, checking her notes. The report was right, but it doesn't tell you what that choice felt like, Jake replied. I had 12 ships crewed by people I had served with for years. Captain Sarah Martinez had just gotten married 3 months earlier. Commander Bill Thompson's son was starting school on the colony. I sent them all to die knowing they couldn't win, just to buy time for the planetary evacuation to begin. Lisa looked down at her tablet. Her analysis had noted the space battle as a tactical delay action. That lasted 4 hours. She had calculated the time gained versus ships lost and concluded it was an efficient trade. She had not thought about the crews. 11 of the 12 ships were destroyed, Jake continued. The 12th ship, the HMS Guardian, made it back to the planet with 30% casualties. I had to look those survivors in the eye and tell them their friends died for 4 hours of preparation time. But those 4 hours saved thousands of lives, Lisa said carefully. Yes, they did. That's what makes it so hard. Jake stood up and walked to the window. If the decisions had been wrong, I could hate myself for being stupid, but they were right. Every terrible choice was the correct tactical decision. That's what I live with. Lisa was beginning to understand something she had never considered in her academic work. You're not haunted by failure, you're haunted by success. The evacuation planning took 3 days of constant decisions, Jake said, still looking out. at the stars. Who goes first? The children, obviously. But what about pregnant women? Elderly people who might not survive the trip? Scientists whose research could benefit humanity? We had limited ship space and 50,000 people. How did you choose? Lisa asked. We didn't. Rachel did. Jake's voice grew softer. My wife coordinated the civilian evacuation. She set up the priority system, managed the logistics, kept people calm. She was brilliant at it. She could have guaranteed herself and Emma places on the first ships out, but she stayed to make sure the system worked. Jake turned back to face Lisa. Do you know what she told me the night before the final? Attack? She said she was proud of me for making the hard choices. She said Emma would understand when she was older. They both died 12 hours later. Lisa felt tears starting again, but she forced herself to keep asking questions. Her academic training demanded complete understanding, even when understanding was painful. The tactical reports mentioned volunteer militia. How many civilians chose to fight? About 3,000, Jake replied, sitting back down. Farmers, teachers, shop owners, researchers. People who had never held a military weapon in their lives. I tried to talk them out of it, but they insisted. They said it was their home too. Were they effective in combat? Jake almost smiled at the question. Dr. Park, you're still thinking like an analyst. Were they effective? Most of them died in the first 6 hours of fighting, but they held position long enough for the professional soldiers to establish better defensive lines. They bought time with their lives. I'm sorry, Lisa said. I don't know how to think about this any other way. My training is all about analyzing outcomes and efficiency. Then let me teach you a different way to think about it, Jake said. Professor Chen taught high school biology. She volunteered for the militia and died defending Evacuation Route 7. She wasn't effective by military standards, but her students got on the ships because she held that position for 2 hours longer than any soldier could have expected. Lisa made notes on her tablet, but now she was writing names instead of tactical assessments. The hardest part wasn't the fighting, Jake continued. It was the waiting. Sitting in the command bunker, watching position after position go dark on the tactical display, knowing that each light going out meant friends were dying, listening to the radio chatter get quieter and quieter as units were overrun. Your communications. Logs show remarkable discipline under pressure, Lisa observed. Discipline. Jake laughed bitterly. I was falling apart inside. The only thing that kept me functional was knowing that people were counting on me to make the right calls. Every tactical decision had to be perfect, because imperfection meant more people would die. Jake pulled out his own tablet and showed Lisa a photo. It was a family picture. A younger Jake with a beautiful woman, and a small girl with bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile. This is Rachel and Emma. Rachel was the smartest person I ever met. She had 3 degrees in agricultural science and could make anything grow anywhere. Emma wanted to be a xenobiologist. She was fascinated by the different alien plant species. Lisa stared at the photo, putting faces to the statistics she had analyzed. Emma collected pictures of alien homeworlds, Jake continued. She had drawings of Zentari crystal forests and Vrak hive gardens. She wanted to visit other planets and study how different species approached agriculture. She was 8 years old and already planning her career around interspecies cooperation. She sounds wonderful, Lisa said quietly. The evacuation ships were supposed to take off in 3 waves, Jake said, putting the tablet away. Rachel and Emma were scheduled for the 2nd wave, which should have been safe. But the hegemony broke through the outer perimeter faster than predicted. I had to make a choice. Delay the 2nd wave launch to evacuate more people from the overrun positions. Or launch immediately with whoever was already aboard. Lisa waited, knowing this was the crucial decision that her analysis had praised as tactically brilliant. I delayed the launch, Jake said. I ordered the ships to wait for 6 more hours while we evacuated people from the compromised zones. It was the right tactical decision. We got 800 more people onto those ships. But Rachel and Emma never made it to the spaceport, Lisa realized. They were killed when Shelter Complex 4 was bombed. If I had launched the ships on schedule, they would have been safe. But 800 other people would have died instead. Jake's voice was completely steady, but Lisa could see the pain in his eyes. So tell me, Dr. Park, was that a brilliant tactical decision? Lisa struggled to find words. Her analytical training told her it was the correct choice, save the maximum number of lives possible. But her human heart understood that Jake had saved strangers at the cost of his own family. I can't answer that, she said finally. Neither can I, Jake replied. And that's what I live with every day. The knowledge that I made the right choice, and it cost me everything that mattered. They sat in silence for several minutes, watching the stars through the window. Finally, Lisa spoke. What do you want me to do with my research? How can I tell this story in a way that honors everyone who died? Jake thought for a moment. Teach the tactics, but teach the cost too. When you show those tactical maps, remember that every position marker represents someone's father or daughter or friend. When you talk about acceptable losses, remember that the people being lost don't think their sacrifice is acceptable. They think it's necessary. Will you help me rewrite the analysis? Lisa asked. Yes, Jake said, but not just the analysis. We need to develop new training protocols, new ways of thinking about defensive operations. We need to make sure that future commanders understand both the tactical requirements and the human cost. Lisa nodded. The galaxy needs to understand that human tactical thinking isn't just about winning or losing. It's about the weight of responsibility. Exactly, Jake said. Other species fight to win or fight to survive. Humans fight to protect. That makes us dangerous, but it also makes us something unique in the galaxy. As they prepared to leave the small conference room, Lisa had one more question. Commander, do you think what happened on Kepler 442b will happen again? Jake looked out at the stars one more time. The hegemony is still out there. There are other threats emerging. Yes, it will happen again. But maybe next time, the commander making those choices will be better. Over the next 3 days of the conference, Jake Morrison and Lisa Park found themselves working together in ways neither had expected. They commandeered a small meeting room and spread tactical displays, psychological profiles, and training manuals across every available surface. Their collaboration drew curious attention from other conference attendees. Lisa's analytical approach complemented Jake's battlefield experience in unexpected ways. Where Jake remembered the emotional weight of decisions, Lisa could identify the underlying strategic patterns. Where Lisa saw tactical innovations, Jake could explain the human factors that made them necessary. Look at this communication timeline, Lisa said, pointing to her tablet screen. During the final 6 hours, message frequency from field units dropped by 70%. I initially thought it indicated communication equipment failure. Jake studied the data she was showing him. It wasn't equipment failure. It was command failure. My failure. When units stop reporting, it usually means they're taking casualties faster than they can process. I should have recognized that pattern and adjusted tactical support. But you were dealing with 15 different crisis points simultaneously, Lisa observed. The timeline shows major tactical decisions every 12 minutes on average. How Could any single person manage that cognitive load? That's exactly the problem, Jake replied. Traditional command structure assumes the commanding officer can maintain tactical awareness of the entire battlefield. But modern warfare is too complex for one person to handle. We need distributed decision-making protocols. Lisa made notes rapidly. So instead of centralized command, you're suggesting tactical autonomy for field units? Not complete autonomy. Guided autonomy based on strategic objectives rather than specific tactical orders. Jake stood up and walked to the wall display, showing the Kepler 442b battle map. If I had given each position commander authority to make tactical retreats based on local conditions, we might have saved more people. But that requires a level of tactical training that most colonial defense forces don't have, Lisa pointed out. Your militia volunteers had minimal military experience. Which brings us back to training protocols, Jake said. We need to develop systems that prepare people for distributed command responsibility, not just following orders. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft chiming sound at the door. Jake looked up to see Admiral Kesatha, the tall Zentari who had approached Lisa after her presentation. Her crystal skin was showing the deep blue patterns that indicated formal diplomatic attention. Commander Morrison, Dr. Park, Kesatha said in her melodious voice. I hope I am not intruding. I have been observing your collaborative work with great interest. Please come in, Lisa said, gesturing to an empty chair. We were just discussing command structure innovations. Kesatha settled into the chair with the fluid grace typical of her species. I confess I am fascinated by human tactical psychology. Your species approaches warfare in ways that other species find difficult to understand. Jake exchanged glances with Lisa. In what way, Admiral? The decisions you made on Kepler 442b, for example, Kesatha said carefully. My tactical analysts have studied that battle extensively. By any rational calculation, you should have evacuated command personnel first, preserved your most experienced officers for future operations. That would have been the logical choice, Jake admitted. Yet you did the opposite. You sent your most junior personnel to safety while keeping your most experienced officers in the most dangerous positions. From a resource preservation standpoint, this seems inefficient. Lisa was about to respond when Jake held up a hand. Admiral, let me ask you a question. If your homeworld was under attack, would you expect your junior officers to die protecting your senior staff? Kesatha's crystal skin shifted to a pale green, confusion mixed with consideration. Our military doctrine prioritizes preservation of command structure and tactical experience. Junior personnel are more easily replaced than senior officers. And that's why your species will never understand human tactical thinking, Jake said, but without hostility. We don't see people as replaceable resources. Every life has equal value, regardless of rank or experience. But surely you recognize the practical benefits of preserving experienced leadership? Kesatha asked. Of course, Jake replied. But there's a deeper strategic consideration. Human soldiers fight harder when they know their leaders share their risks. They make greater sacrifices when they trust that command decisions are based on protecting lives, not preserving hierarchy. Lisa was taking notes again, seeing patterns she had not noticed before. So the willingness of human commanders to sacrifice themselves actually improves overall tactical effectiveness? Exactly, Jake said. Our soldiers fight with the knowledge that their leaders value their lives. That creates a level of unit cohesion and tactical dedication that other species find mystifying. Casitha's skin patterns shifted to a warm amber that indicated deep thought. This explains something that has puzzled Zentari military theorists for decades. Human forces consistently outperform their numerical and technological disadvantages. We assumed it was due to superior tactical training. It's not training, Jake said. It's trust. Human soldiers fight harder because they know their commanders see them as people, not statistics. This is remarkable, Casitha said. You are suggesting that human tactical superiority stems not from military innovation but from emotional psychology? Partly, Lisa interjected. But there's more to it. The emotional psychology enables tactical innovations that other species can't replicate. The willingness to sacrifice command personnel allows for tactical risks that rational military doctrine would prohibit. Jake nodded. When you're willing to lose everything to protect civilians, you can take tactical chances that purely logical thinking would reject. Sometimes those impossible chances work. Like the final stand at the spaceport, Lisa added. Any rational analysis would have concluded that 200 soldiers could not hold against 10,000 attackers for 6 hours. But they did it anyway because they knew the stakes. Casitha was quiet for several minutes, her skin cycling through different color patterns as she processed this information. Finally, she spoke again. Commander Morrison, Dr. Park, I would like to invite representatives from my government to observe your training protocol development. We have much to learn from human tactical psychology. We'd be honored, Lisa said. But I should warn you, implementing these protocols requires more than just tactical training. It requires fundamental changes in military culture. Explain, Casitha requested. Jake leaned forward. Admiral, can you imagine a Zentari military where the lowest-ranking soldier felt empowered to override orders from a superior officer if local conditions demanded it? Casitha's skin went completely colorless, the Zentari equivalent of shock. That would be unthinkable. Our entire military structure is based on hierarchical authority, and that's why these protocols won't work for your species without cultural adaptation, Jake said. Human military effectiveness comes from our ability to balance discipline with individual initiative. We follow orders, but we also expect every soldier to think independently when necessary. This is a fascinating paradox, Casitha observed. You maintain military discipline while encouraging individual decision-making? It's not a paradox, Lisa said. It's a different definition of discipline. Human military discipline is about commitment to mission objectives, not blind obedience to specific orders. Jake stood up and walked back to the tactical display. Look at Position 7 from the Kepler 442b battle. Sergeant Martinez was ordered to hold for 2 hours. When the situation changed, she recognized that holding for 4 hours would save an additional transport ship. So she held for 4 hours, even though it meant her entire squad would die. She disobeyed orders? Casitha asked. She interpreted orders, Jake corrected. Her mission was to protect the evacuation. When circumstances changed, she adapted her tactics to better fulfill that mission. That's what we mean by disciplined initiative. Casitha's skin shifted to deep purple, the color of profound revelation. You are saying that human soldiers are trained to think strategically, not just tactically? Every human soldier is taught to understand the bigger picture, Lisa confirmed. They need to know why they're fighting, not just how to fight. That knowledge allows them to make intelligent adaptations when the tactical situation changes. This explains so much about human military performance, Casitha said. Your forces adapt faster to changing conditions because every individual is capable of strategic thinking. Exactly, Jake said. Other species train soldiers to be efficient tactical units. We train soldiers to be thinking, caring, responsible individuals who happen to be carrying weapons. Kessetha stood up, her movements more energetic than before. Commander, Dr. Park, this conversation has been extraordinary. I must share these insights with my government immediately. The implications for galactic military cooperation are significant. As the Zentari Admiral prepared to leave, she paused at the door. One final question, if I may. This approach to military training, treating every soldier as an individual capable of strategic thinking, does it not create? Jake Morrison was reviewing training protocols with Lisa Park when the conference room's emergency alert system activated. Red lights flashed along the walls, and the calm voice of Station Alpha 7's artificial intelligence filled the room. All conference attendees, please report to the main auditorium immediately. Priority military briefing in progress. Jake and Lisa exchanged worried glances. Emergency briefings during academic conferences usually meant one thing: active military threats. They quickly gathered their materials and joined the stream of humans and aliens moving through the corridors toward the main auditorium. The large conference room was packed with military officers from dozens of species. Admiral Hayes, Jake's commanding officer, stood at the front podium with a grim expression. Behind him, the main display showed a tactical map of human colonial space, with several systems marked in urgent red. "Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished alien colleagues," Admiral Hayes began, "we have received confirmed reports of coordinated hegemony attacks on 3 human colonial systems. New Terra, Kepler 186F, and the Ross 128 system are all under assault. As of 6 hours ago..." A murmur of concern swept through the auditorium. Jake felt his stomach drop. New Terra was humanity's second-largest colonial settlement, home to nearly 300,000 people. It was also one of the most strategically important systems in human space. Initial reports indicate hegemony fleet strengths of approximately 150 ships at each target, Admiral Hayes continued. They appear to be using the same overwhelming force tactics that proved effective at Kepler 442b 5 years ago. Jake felt Lisa tense beside him at the mention of his former home. Around the auditorium, he could see other officers making the same connection. The hegemony was repeating their successful strategy on a larger scale. Current human fleet deployments allow us to provide significant reinforcement to only one of the 3 systems under attack, Admiral Hayes said. Command is requesting tactical assessments and strategic recommendations from this conference's attendees. Admiral Kessetha raised one of her crystalline hands. Admiral Hayes, what are the defensive capabilities of the 3 systems? New Terra has a full colonial defense force garrison, approximately 20 ships and 15,000 ground troops. Kepler 186F has minimal defenses, 6 ships and 3,000 troops. Ross 128 is primarily a research station with 2 patrol ships and 500 security personnel. Jake did quick mental calculations. Even with reinforcement, any of the 3 systems would be dramatically outnumbered. The hegemony was applying lessons learned from their previous campaigns, bringing enough force to guarantee overwhelming superiority. What are the civilian populations at each location? Asked a Vrak colonel, her insectoid features clicking with concern. New Terra has approximately 280,000 civilians. Kepler 186F has 95,000. Ross 128 has 12,000, mostly research personnel and their families. Admiral Hayes paused, letting the numbers sink in. Total civilian population at risk is nearly 400,000 people. The auditorium fell silent. Everyone present understood the implications. Even if human reinforcements could save one system, the Other two would likely be lost. It was the same impossible mathematics that had defined the Battle of Kepler 442b, but on a much larger scale. "Sir?" Jake found himself standing up, his voice carrying clearly through the large room. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison requesting permission to speak." Admiral Hayes nodded. "Go ahead, Commander." Jake felt hundreds of eyes focusing on him, human and alien alike. Based on analysis of the Kepler 442b engagement, the hegemony expects human forces to fight conventional defensive battles. They're planning for each system to hold fixed positions until overwhelmed. "Your point, Commander?" Admiral Hayes asked. "My point is that we should give them something they're not expecting. Instead of trying to hold 3 separate defensive actions, we coordinate all 3 systems into a single strategic operation." A human general near the front of the auditorium turned to face Jake. "Explain." Jake moved to the front of the room, his mind already working through tactical possibilities. Lisa followed, carrying her tablet with the research they had been developing. "The hegemony strategy depends on isolated systems fighting separate battles," Jake said, gesturing to the tactical display. "But what if the 3 systems don't fight separately? What if they fight as one coordinated operation? The systems are light years apart," Admiral Hayes pointed out. "Coordination would be nearly impossible with communication delays." "Not real-time tactical coordination," Lisa interjected, understanding Jake's thinking. "Strategic coordination. Each system executes the same basic plan simultaneously, but adapts to local conditions." Jake nodded. "Exactly. We use the distributed command protocols Dr. Park and I have been developing. Each system gets the same strategic objective, but local commanders have authority to adapt tactics as needed." Admiral Kesatha's skin shifted to interested green. "What would this strategic objective be?" Jake looked at the display showing the 3 threatened systems. Maximum civilian evacuation with coordinated resource sharing. Instead of each system trying to save only its own population, all 3 systems work together to save as many people as possible from all 3 locations. "How would that work practically?" asked the VRAC colonel. Lisa stepped forward, pulling up her tactical analysis on her tablet. "The key insight from Kepler 442b is that defensive actions are most effective when they're designed around evacuation, priorities rather than territorial control. If we apply that principle across multiple systems, we can achieve better overall results." "Dr. Park is correct," Jake said. "Instead of 3 separate last stands, we create 3 coordinated evacuation operations. Ross 128 starts evacuating immediately toward New Terra. Kepler 186F begins moving civilians toward predetermined jump points. New Terra prepares to receive evacuees from both other systems." Admiral Hayes studied the tactical display. "You're suggesting we abandon 2 of the 3 systems to save the populations?" "I'm suggesting we save more lives by thinking strategically instead of territorially," Jake replied. "The hegemony expects us to die defending dirt. Instead, we live by defending people." A senior human admiral Jake didn't recognize stood up from the front row. "Commander Morrison, your proposal would require abandoning significant colonial infrastructure. The economic losses would be enormous." "Sir, with respect, the economic losses from losing 400,000 people would be incalculable," Jake responded. "Infrastructure can be rebuilt. People cannot be replaced." Admiral Kesatha was studying her own tactical analysis. "Commander Morrison, this strategy would also create psychological advantages. The hegemony has achieved their recent victories by demoralizing human defenders with overwhelming force. Coordinated resistance might disrupt their psychological warfare tactics." Exactly, Lisa said. Instead of 3 desperate last stands, we show them coordinated, intelligent resistance. We demonstrate that humanity fights smarter, not just harder. Admiral Hayes looked around the auditorium. This is a radical departure from established defensive doctrine. What makes you think it would work? Jake took a deep breath. Because I've seen what happens when human forces fight, knowing they're part of something larger than themselves. The soldiers who died at Kepler 442b didn't just fight for their own colony. They fought for the idea that human civilization would continue. That knowledge made them capable of impossible things. And if we can extend that psychological advantage across multiple systems simultaneously, Lisa added, we create a force multiplier that pure numerical calculations can't account for. The auditorium buzzed with discussions in multiple languages as representatives from different species debated the proposal. Finally, Admiral Hayes called for quiet. Commander Morrison, Dr. Park, this is an intriguing strategy, but implementing it would require someone with detailed knowledge of multi-system, defensive operations, and the psychological factors you've described. Admiral Hayes paused. Would you be willing to oversee the implementation personally? Jake felt his heart racing. The thought of returning to active combat, of making life-and-death decisions again, terrified him. But the alternative was watching. Hundreds of thousands of people faced the same fate as his family. Yes, sir, Jake said. I volunteer for active duty. I want to go with him, Lisa said suddenly, surprising everyone, including Jake. As a strategic advisor, my analysis suggests that this operation will require real-time adaptation of tactical theory to battlefield conditions. Jake turned to stare at her. Dr. Park, this isn't an academic exercise. People will die. People are already dying, Lisa replied firmly. And if I don't go, more people will die than necessary. You need someone who understands the strategic theory behind the tactical decisions. I understand it better than anyone. Admiral Hayes looked between them. Dr. Park, you're a civilian academic. Combat zones are not appropriate places for researchers. Sir, with respect, I'm no longer just a researcher, Lisa said. I'm someone who understands the human cost of tactical decisions and chooses to take responsibility for that understanding. Commander Morrison taught me that tactical brilliance isn't about the decisions themselves. It's about carrying the weight of those decisions afterward. 6 months after the Battle of New Terra, Jake Morrison stood before another conference room full of military officers and academics, but this time everything felt different. The audience included many of the same alien species who had attended the conference on Station Alpha 7, but now they looked at human military doctrine with something approaching awe rather than curiosity. Lisa Park stood beside him at the podium, no longer the nervous academic who had unknowingly dissected his greatest tragedy. She wore a civilian advisor's uniform now, with commendation ribbons that marked her as a veteran of active combat operations. Her presentation materials were spread across the display behind them, but these charts showed victory rather than sacrifice. Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished colleagues, Lisa began, her voice steady and confident. 6 months ago, we presented a case study on the defense of Kepler 442b, analyzing it as an example of tactical sacrifice. Today, we want to present the Battle of New Terra as an example of tactical evolution. Jake watched the audience as Lisa clicked to her first slide. The tactical display showed the 3-system coordination that had saved nearly 400,000 civilian lives while preserving most of the defending military forces. It was a stark contrast to the casualty reports from Kepler 442b. The key innovation was not technological or strategic, Lisa continued. It was psychological. Instead of fighting 3 separate defensive battles, human forces fought one coordinated operation based on shared understanding of tactical objectives. Admiral Kessetha, the Zentari observer, raised her hand. Dr. Park, your success seems to contradict traditional military doctrine. You abandoned 2 heavily developed systems without a fight. How do you justify the economic losses? Jake stepped forward. Admiral, the economic development of Kepler 186F and Ross 128 represented approximately 50 billion credits of infrastructure investment. The human resources saved from those systems represent something that cannot be measured in credits: the continued existence of 107,000 irreplaceable individuals. But surely there is some calculation that weighs infrastructure value against population preservation, asked a VRAC colonel. No, Jake replied simply. That's what other species don't understand about human tactical thinking. We don't calculate the relative value of people versus things. People always win that calculation. Lisa brought up the next slide showing casualty comparisons between the 2 battles. The Battle of New Terra resulted in 3,200 military casualties and 847 civilian casualties, compared to 38,000 total casualties at Kepler 442b. The tactical approaches produced dramatically different outcomes. What changed? Asked a human general from the front row. Jake looked at Lisa, then back at the audience. What changed was our understanding of what we were fighting for. At Kepler 442b, I was fighting to hold territory. At New Terra, we fought to protect people. That shift in objective enabled tactical innovations that pure defensive thinking could never achieve. Can you elaborate on these tactical innovations? Admiral Kessetha requested. Lisa pulled up a detailed analysis. The primary innovation was distributed strategic coordination. Instead of centralized tactical control, each system commander was given strategic objectives and tactical autonomy. This allowed real-time adaptation to local conditions while maintaining overall operational coherence. But such an approach requires extraordinary trust between command levels, observed the FRAC colonel. How did you achieve that trust in the midst of crisis? Jake smiled, remembering the conversations with Commanders Chen and Santos during the battle. The trust was built on shared understanding of what mattered. Every commander knew that mission. Success was measured by lives saved, not territory held. When everyone agrees on the objective, tactical coordination becomes much simpler. A new voice spoke from the back of the room. Commander Morrison, Dr. Park, this is Captain Martinez from the Ross 128 evacuation operation. Jake recognized her. Immediately, one of the young officers who had helped execute the civilian evacuation. I wanted to thank you for giving us a strategy that let us save everyone instead of choosing who had to die. Captain Martinez exemplifies another crucial innovation, Lisa said. Human military training now emphasizes individual strategic thinking rather than pure tactical obedience. Every soldier understands the broader mission objectives and feels empowered to adapt tactics to serve those objectives. Admiral Kessetha's crystal skin shifted to deep amber. Profound contemplation. You are describing a fundamental difference between human military psychology and that of other species. We train soldiers to execute orders efficiently. You train soldiers to think strategically. Exactly, Jake confirmed. A human soldier who understands why they're fighting will make better tactical decisions than one who simply follows orders. More importantly, they'll fight harder for objectives they believe in. This explains something that has puzzled Galactic military analysts, said a new voice. Dr. Yethara, a gas-being eth whose color patterns indicated scientific excitement. Human forces consistently outperform numerical and technological disadvantages. We assumed this was due to superior equipment or tactics. It's neither, Lisa replied. It's because human soldiers fight knowing that their leaders value their lives and trust their judgment. That knowledge enables tactical performance that purely hierarchical military structures cannot achieve. Jake walked to the tactical display and pointed to specific battle positions. During the final assault on Nu,